All right, today we're going to play detective. We've got two ancient documents on our hands. One's a history book, the Acts of the Apostles, and the other is a personal letter, supposedly written from a Roman prison. And our big puzzle is, is this letter legit? Is it the real deal? So how do you even tell if a 2,000-year-old letter is a fake? I mean, when you first look at this one, it doesn't look good. You put it side by side with the history book and, whoa, there are some huge contradictions. Things just don't line up. But what if those aren't actually mistakes? What if they're clues? Okay, let's dive in. So our first clue, or what really looks like a major problem, is the timeline. When you try to place the letter to Timothy next to the history we have in the book of Acts, the whole story just kind of falls apart. The details don't just clash, they seem to create a timeline that is flat out impossible. Here's exactly what I mean. In this letter from prison, the author just casually mentions a couple of specific events. The problem is, if we're using the book of Acts as our historical map, well, neither of those events could have ever happened. Okay, just look at these contradictions. The letter says Erastus stayed at Corinth. But wait a minute, the history shows Timothy was right there with Paul when he left Corinth. So why would Paul state the obvious? It's like me texting you we're at the coffee shop while we're sitting at the very same table. It makes no sense. And the second one, it's even worse. The letter claims Paul left a man named Trophimus sick at Miletum, but the history is crystal clear. Trophimus was not left behind. He traveled with Paul all the way to Jerusalem. Seriously, these are just bizarre mistakes that no competent forger would ever dream of making. So is the letter just a really clumsy fake? Well, not according to William Paley. He comes up with this stunningly simple solution that just flips the entire problem on its head. He asks, what if the imprisonment that ends the book of Acts wasn't actually the end of the story? Paley argues that all these details make perfect sense if Paul was released, traveled around some more, and then got arrested a second time. This letter, he suggests, was written during that second, unrecorded imprisonment. And suddenly, the impossible details, they fit. He could have left Trophimus sick on that journey. The mistake isn't a mistake at all. It's actually a clue pointing to a whole missing chapter of history. But, authentic letters aren't just about timelines. They're about people. So our next clue digs into Timothy's own family, and it reveals this subtle connection between the two documents that is just incredibly personal. So the history book, it gives us a simple sketch. Timothy's mom was a Jewish believer, his dad was a Greek. Then the personal letter comes in and fills in the color, naming his mother Eunice and his grandmother Lois as these pillars of his faith. And notice the quiet harmony here. Acts only mentions his mother's faith, and the letter praises the women in his life while being totally silent about his father. The two accounts they fit together perfectly. Now, this family dynamic we just uncovered directly explains our third clue, which is all about Timothy's childhood education. And this is another one of those really quiet details that ends up speaking volumes. But first, there's a really crucial piece of context we need to get. When the letter says Timothy knew the Holy Scriptures from the time he was a child, it's talking exclusively about the Old Testament. The New Testament as a collection, it just didn't exist yet. Okay, so the letter says Timothy knew the Scriptures from childhood, and the history book gives us the how. I mean, how would a boy with a Greek father growing up in a Greek city know the Jewish Scriptures? It's simple. His mother was a Jewish believer who taught him. One book raises a question, the other gives the answer, and it feels completely natural, totally unplanned. And now we come to our final and, honestly, maybe the most compelling piece of evidence. This is a clue that relies on this deep, almost subconscious layer of geographical and personal knowledge that a forger would be incredibly unlikely to have. In the letter, Paul reminds Timothy of some specific persecutions he went through. Now, Paul was persecuted in a lot of cities, so why does he single out these three? Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra? Well, the answer is found by looking at a map and a timeline. And here is the kicker. The history in Acts shows us that these three persecutions happened in exactly this order, in the towns right around Timothy's home, immediately before Paul showed up and met him for the very first time. For a young guy like Timothy, this wasn't some ancient history. This was the shocking local news from just down the road. So this isn't some random list of cities. Paul is basically saying, Timothy, you know this story. You were there for this. He's appealing to Timothy's personal knowledge of events from his own backyard. Just think about it for a second. A forger would probably pick some famous persecutions from somewhere else, not this specific local sequence that's so deeply connected to one person's life story.
And here's where the precision just gets astonishing. The history book tells us that right after Lystra, Paul went to the next town, Derbe, where he faced no persecution at all. And the letter, in its list of persecutions, it correctly and very pointedly leaves Derbe out. That kind of subtle accuracy, that's the hallmark of a true story. Okay, so after looking at these 4 clues, the timeline, the family, the education, and the local knowledge, what's the verdict? What can we conclude about our 2,000-year-old literary mystery?
Well, for Paley, the verdict is crystal clear. There's no single smoking gun. Instead, what you have is this web of interlocking details, a timeline error that actually reveals lost history, a family portrait that fits together perfectly, and a list of persecutions that is tailored to one man's hometown. These connections are just too subtle, too intricate, and frankly too clever to be fake. They are the fingerprints of reality.
As Paley himself put it, the very subtlety of these clues is what gives them their power. Anyone can fake an obvious connection, but these details, they feel accidental, just woven into the fabric of the story. And as any good detective knows, an accidental clue is the most convincing one you can possibly find.
This deep dive into just a handful of verses really leaves us with a fascinating question. If this much is hidden inside a single ancient letter, what other histories are just waiting to be discovered in the details of other texts? It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the biggest truths are found in the smallest places. You just have to know how to look.